Hey guys, Scott here. Today we're talking about the Nikon ZF. We're talking about firmware 2.0, and specifically we're talking about the bird subject detection that's been added to autofocus. Is it worth your time? Is it markedly better than it was? Is it competitive in any way to the Z8 and the Z9? We're going to go through all of that today, but first, to establish a little bit of credibility, because I don't have the means of recording my EVF on these cameras, I'm going to show you some of the photos I've gotten out of the Z9 and the Z100 to 400, coupled with the 1.4x teleconverter. We're just going to use this as a bit of a resume to show that I know how to track birds pretty reliably, to pan, to keep them in frame, keep them centered, get sharp results pretty reliably. This is mostly because the results you're going to see with the ZF aren't really up to this quality, and it's to prove in a way that even with the same lens, the same teleconverter, and all the same settings across the camera that can be adjusted, the ZF is still lagging behind in meaningful ways to the top tier cameras like the Z8 and the Z9. So in my mind, if you're thinking about bird photography, there's really two use cases that you're going to run into most. One is a perched bird. Two is a bird that's flying. And there's a subset of flying birds where they could be flying against the wind, and so they're not moving, side to side through your frame very fast. Or they could be coming at you or away from you. Or they could be going, across the frame very quickly if they're at full speed and they're not flying against the wind or something like that. So bird in flight is a pretty tricky deal compared to perched. I will say I've never had issues with perched bird photography with the ZF using a small square single point. I didn't use subject detection even on animal because I never felt that it gave me the results that I expected, and certainly didn't give me the results that the Z8 and the Z9 give me with bird autofocus on. So to that end, I've never really even had a problem with perched birds on any Nikon camera, going back to the Z7 II, a camera with pretty bad autofocus. You put it in AFS, you put it on single point, you get the smallest little box that you can get, you throw it over the bird's face or the bird's eye, you have a decent enough aperture to get most of the bird in focus, and it's easy. Now, where it gets really easy is on the new firmware for the Z8 and the Z9. You can put those cameras in auto area, and you can put bird detection on, and almost without fail, the birds will be spot on, bang on, in focus, and no longer do you have to move your focus point around. It knows the bird shapes. It knows where the head is. If the eye is remotely near you, it's going to pick out the eye specifically. And so the test here is, how does the ZF work in these same situations? So here we've got a robin, fairly dimly lit situation, running auto area, bird autofocus. Grabbed the eye great, even though it's kind of a convoluted background. It had no problem detecting this bird even really head on and finding the eye. Same kind of story here with this sparrow. You've got a really easy background, and so the camera picks up on it immediately, locks onto the eye the entire time, knows exactly what the bird is and where it is. So this is like a best case scenario, slam dunk. Same bird, but he's moved to a different branch, and now he's got some stuff behind him. The camera had no issues. It picked up on his eye, knew where he was, focused on the eye the whole time, 100% keeper rate. I wanted to test how accurate it could be in a dimly lit, shadowy situation. So this is at the exposure I took the photo at. And then in post, I just raised it up to make sure that the bird's eye actually was in focus. Now, it's sort of a throwaway photo. It's got a ton of noise. It's not a great photo in any regard, but it at least proved to me that it was finding the eye in a really low light situation, which was pretty impressive. The ZF doesn't have any issues so far in my experience with birds on the ground. As long as you've got an eye pretty close to you, somewhat in your direction, it's going to find it, even an off angle like this. The older subject detection for animals would have probably found its shoulder in my experience, but here it's got nice sharp eye focus. However, here's a situation where I could not get the bird detection to find the bird. It was focusing on that little cleat on the right side in that little piece of metal. It thought that metal was the bird the entire time I had this bird in frame. It was perched, it was facing me, and I could not get it unstuck off of that little metal bit. Now here's a situation I want to call out. I was using the 1.4x teleconverter and trying to shoot perched birds. These would normally be super easy automatic type shots, but I noticed on more than a few of them, when I would zoom in just a little bit, I could see that the focus was like non-existent. It wasn't really front focusing. It wasn't really back focusing that I could tell. It just wasn't sharply focused. This happened in a number of cases where at first glance, the photo looks okay, but then upon closer inspection and zooming in, you can actually see that not much at all is in focus. It's a little concerning because you would think that because of the lower megapixel count, you actually want to use a teleconverter more often than not if you have a shorter lens to get you more reach. But I found that actually using a teleconverter was getting me worse results. I'll note that using this lens and this teleconverter never result in photos being soft like this on my Z9. Okay, birds in flight. Maybe the ZF is your first camera that is bird in flight capable. Let's just call it that. And you're excited to see what you can get out of it. If you have experience with let's just say a better camera, a camera better suited for birds in flight, maybe it's something with a stacked sensor or a partially stacked sensor, you will immediately notice the difference here, okay? There is substantial blackout when you're shooting on high burst. And I wouldn't go past high. High would be my max, okay? Because there are other caveats that come with shooting past high where you don't get true blackout. You're seeing a slideshow of the images that you took, and tracking becomes almost impossible. So to this end, okay, you're taking your ZF out in the field and you're going, well, I'm probably have a camera that's more capable than any camera I've ever had before. And that may be true. And you will get keepers. And we're going to show you some keepers here in just a second. But it has to be said, your keeper rate will be substantially lower with this camera, with the Z5 II, with the Z50 II, than it would be with a Z8 or a Z9. And the core reason for that is down to two things. The Z8 and the Z9 have dual data feeds between the sensor and the EVF. And they have much faster readouts on the sensor. So that combination equals a lot more autofocus calculations per second happening on those cameras than are happening on these cameras. And because of that, any little change of distance between you and the bird, the Z8 and the Z9 pick up on that immediately. These cameras are almost operating on a bit of a lag, if you want to think of it that way. And so you're popping off a burst and the bird changes a little bit. And during that change, those photos will be just a little bit soft. And then the bird gets a little more consistent. You're still popping photos off. And now those photos look better and they're sharper. And they're just, maybe those are your keepers of a burst. It's just due to the total amount of calculations the ZF can make per second being far lower than the Z8 or the Z9. So for birds in flight, if you have a bird flying towards you or away from you, that's going to be a tricky situation. You're not going to have as many keepers. If you have birds flying parallel to you, side to side, that's not as bad. And you're going to find you actually get more keepers in a scenario like that. If you have a rapidly entering the frame bird and you try to lock onto it, you weren't really pre-focused on this area and you try to just hold your focus button down and that bird is already out of the frame over here, you're probably not going to get a picture of that bird. Where on the Z8 and the Z9, you actually have a chance. So your form needs to be like impeccable with the ZF for birding, especially for panning and tracking. Because with blackout, you're not going to actually see your subject the entire time you're firing a burst off. You will almost see the little green box, as it follows your subject. You kind of see that in your mind's eye through the burst, and you kind of know the last position of it. Okay, I need to adjust. Last time it popped a frame off, the bird was up here, so I'm going to move the camera up. Now, the next time it's here, okay, that's good. Let's get it back in the center a little bit. There's a lot of work there versus the Z8 and the Z9. You just have the bird there. in your viewfinder the entire time, and you're just focusing on keeping it in the middle of the viewfinder if that's what you're after. So it's tough. You have to have good form. You have to have good technique. You got to do all the right things to set yourself up for success with the ZF for birds in flight. Yes, you can get keepers. Absolutely. No, your keeper rate will not be anywhere near a Z8 or a Z9. So let's start with just a quick flyby sequence. This is a pretty tough situation with the old autofocus. But you can see even with a rapidly changing background, we've got lots of complex shapes and colors in the background. The ZF held its own, and it kept the duck in great focus throughout the sequence. Here is a quick flyby, a little bit at an off angle. And so this is a little bit tougher situation. It does appear that maybe the neck is a little more focused than the eye, which is to be expected. This isn't doing as many autofocus calculations per second. And so where the eye was suddenly is where the neck is by the time the camera catches up, but still largely in focus in a pretty nice photo. Here we've got a side-to-side flyby, pretty easy stuff, but these birds were in shadow and they were pretty small in the frame, and the ZF picked them up just fine and tracked them nicely through a series of photos. Same story for these cormorants. We had the water behind them, which sometimes can throw off the autofocus system. But we had a series, a burst of photos here that tracked it nicely through the whole series. They were all in focus and pretty nice little photo. And then we've got the torture tests, which are swallows in flight. These are extremely hard to track when you have blackout. You're basically spraying and praying. You kind of know where they are, but you don't really know where they're going to go because they fly so erratically. I had my shutter speed at 1/4000th of a second. I was at f8, and I was just praying that I was going to get something out of a long burst. I was trying to track where the green autofocus box had been for the last shot, adjusting the camera accordingly. And then when I get back, I find that a couple of these are in really nice focus, great colors, nice posing, and we get some winners. But it was definitely a spray and pray type situation with these guys. Here, I was trying to track them over the water, and you can see that for a series of these photos, we've got one that's just really badly out of focus. This one actually is in really good focus, although it's an uninteresting bird shape. We really don't have any details of the bird. And then this last one is sort of an in-between. It's starting to lose focus. It's starting to focus more on the water. And it just sort of shows you what a crapshoot shooting a small subject against a busy background can be on the ZF. Okay, and the last point is resolution. So we've got 24 megapixels to work with here on the ZF. We've got 45 megapixels to work with on the Z8 and the Z9. Does that make a difference? Absolutely, yes it does. Absolutely. Like there's just no two ways about it. For birding, it's super important that you fill the frame up as much as you can from the get-go. There are so many little details in feathers and eyes, the way that things are moving and rippling. You want the most detail that you can get, and you want to crop the least amount that you possibly have to. So, if you have a 100 to 400 lens like I do, even if you've got a teleconverter, if you live out in the country like I do, 560 millimeters is kind of short sometimes. And so having a higher resolution camera to be able to crop just a little bit helps a ton. I don't feel super comfortable with these ZF files after working with these birds for the last week. I don't feel super comfortable cropping these files. So if the bird isn't filling the frame like I want it to, maybe a 10% crop, maybe a 15% crop, but you better be up-resing it in either Lightroom Enhance or Photoshop up-resing or Topaz Gigapixel or any one of these tools. You're going to have to run it through a slew of software to get the noise out, to get the picture up-res to a decent megapixel count again. And now you're relying on AI to fill in the gaps instead of just natively capturing the detail. So if you are serious about birding with a ZF, you need to figure out what lens length is going to work for where you live. There's a lot of people that live in Florida or the city, and they've got birds that are acclimated to humans. You don't need a super long lens to do lots of birding in those scenarios. Birds aren't really scared of people. If you're like me and you live out in the country, birds want nothing to do with you. you aren't posing a threat, but they don't care. They don't know. They are very skittish and they just want to get out of that situation. And so honestly, 560 millimeters has been a little bit short for me. I've been thinking about going to a 600 prime and adding my 1.4 teleconverter to it, but I just haven't gotten there yet. It's not been a super big part of what I shoot. It's one of those future plan things. It's just something to think about. I would not crop the ZF files if I could absolutely get away with it. But that means you're going to need glass that maybe you don't have today, and that's a bigger investment. And if you're investing in really good glass, I'm kind of the mind I would probably add a Z8 to the kit if you care that much about birding, because your results are going to be that much better. So like most things in life, if you hit something with a hammer hard enough for long enough, it's eventually going to go where you want it to. And that's kind of how I feel about birding, especially in flight with the ZF. You will get some keepers. I got some keepers and they're pretty nice photos. In no situation did I feel like the photo was up to the quality that the Z8 or the Z9 would have given me. And so if birds in flight is a substantial part of what you shoot, I would strongly reconsider the idea of a ZF, a Z5 II, a Z52, any of these cameras. I don't know that I would consider these as your first look option for birds in flight. If all you really care about are perched birds or birds walking around with you, or you live in the city and you can get pretty close to big birds like herons and egrets, they let you walk right up to them, you're in business. There's nothing that the ZF can't do for you. The bird detection will work really well for you. You can always fall back to single point if it's having a little bit of a meltdown. But in general, your results will be really good. You won't be, panning really fast, seeing the rolling shutter artifacts of things in the background. I think you can get away with the ZF in that situation. But if really fast panning shots interest you, or little flitty birds like swallows interest you, this is not the camera to go for. And that just is what it is. I think a lot of people were really interested that the ZF got this update, and actually got this update before the Z6 III, which is kind of hilarious since the Z6 III is the more capable body for birds in flight. It is what it is. But I think it piqued a lot of people's interest, and they go, why would Nikon add this if the ZF wasn't a capable birding camera? Well, I think they're trying to get feature parity across their line, but in the real world, you're going to run into things like slower sensor readout speeds and the single data pipe. It just is what it is, and you need to know that. And so I'm telling you that. Hopefully this video has been educational. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about the ZF. Please continue to use that like button to let me know if this content was helpful. Consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, I encourage you to get out 10 minutes today. Go get you a dang photo. Go, whatever. Even if you don't take a photo, just go sit in the sun. It's springtime. It's beautiful. Just get out in the world, capture a little bit of it, and I'll see you when I see you. Thanks for watching.